The Supreme Court has just released a major decision concerning one of the most defining cases brought before the justices this term. This one's certain to have a lasting impact on millions of American students across this country. The court has just handed down a decision on affirmative action. Students for Fair Admissions, a nonprofit organization, had sued the University of North Carolina and Harvard. And the question at issue here: can public and private colleges and universities continue to use race as one factor among many in deciding who gets admitted? We have just learned moments ago that the Supreme Court is now striking down both Harvard and UNC's program when it comes to race used in admissions. The court going forward in their decision saying they're going to set new limits on the use of race when it pertains to a particular student must be part of their individual story and not simply their identity. I want to bring in Terry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for years for us. Terry, this is a blow for Harvard and for UNC trying to defend their programs. Again, the Supreme Court striking down their programs, but appearing to limit moving forward, saying race can be a factor, but it has to be part of an individual student's biography, personal story, their narrative.
That's it exactly, David. It's not just Harvard and the University of North Carolina that use the justification of diversity in the campus life and in the student body as a way of reaching out and finding students that could contribute to that. In that way, Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the court and striking down Harvard's and University of North Carolina's admissions policies, said that they used race in a negative manner, involved racial stereotyping, and they lacked meaningful endpoints. When would they know that the balance had been achieved? And Roberts saying rather sternly, we have never permitted admissions programs to work in that way, and we will not do so today. Instead, as you point out, the Chief Justice saying it must be tied to that student's, that individual's experience. He says at the end of his opinion, he says that if a student has overcome obstacles and can express that in, say, an essay or in a record of achievement, that student's courage and determination has overcome obstacles from racial discrimination. That student can, in fact, be considered in a slightly different way. You can't balance the student body. You can't reach for diversity. It's the student's story, experience, not the student's identity, that can be considered under this rule. It really does knock down pretty much all of the admissions policies that consider race right now on the basis of diversity and changes the game really for students trying to get into colleges and universities.
Yes, a big picture question here, Terry, for you. It's not just Harvard and UNC, which is these cases involve their particular programs, but this is sweeping in nature, will affect colleges across this country in how they look at an individual's personal story in deciding whether or not they're admitted.
Hundreds of colleges across the country and universities, state and private, have, since the 1970s, tried to achieve diversity on campus by looking at the racial or ethnic backgrounds of students and essentially, without using quotas, tried to balance the student body and achieve diversity for educational purposes on the theory that a diverse student body, you get different points of view, you get a better quality of argument and discussion in classrooms. Those programs are now ended by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court requires an individual consideration of every single applicant. And if in that applicant's story there is a story or experience of overcoming discrimination on the basis of race or religion or ethnicity, and that student expresses that either in essay or interview or through their accomplishments, the schools and universities will be able to take into account, but no more, according to the Supreme Court today, of this effort to achieve diversity overall by looking at the identity, not the story or experiences, but the identity of a student alone.
All right, stick with us here, Terry. I want to bring in Devin Dwyer, who also covers the court for us. And Devin, this is sweeping in nature, given the 40 years of legal precedent that allowed colleges and universities to use affirmative action in trying to make their student body more diverse.
It sure is, David. I mean, this is a sea change in American law and American society. It's a big victory for critics of affirmative action who have said that program is unfair for years, violates the spirit of the Constitution. But a big setback, as Terry was saying, for universities which have relied on this program to diversify their campuses. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who herself has described the role that affirmative action played in her career, dissenting today sharply with the three liberal justices. She wrote, "This rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress." She said it now strips out almost all uses of race in college admissions. This will force colleges now headed into the fall college application season to rethink their strategies for diversity on campus, and that will affect every high school student this fall, David.
Devin Dwyer with us as well. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, I know the White House is tracking this as well. Any statement?
David, I'm told the White House right now is still digging through this decision. We know it is quite lengthy. They are trying to digest this, absorb the impacts of all of this. I do think it is probably likely that we will hear from the president at some point on this today, given the focus that this administration has put on the importance of equality. They have put this issue at the forefront of literally everything they do here. In fact, on the president's very first day in office, one of the first executive orders he signed was on advancing racial equality. This, of course, is a case that the White House had urged the court not to take up. The Harvard case, they had argued there was no sound reason to take this up in the first place. And of course, David, all of this is coming as we have to consider the broader political environment right now. We have seen Republican lawmakers, governors, even several of the Republican presidential candidates have been targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, especially in higher education. And this White House, in talking to officials before this decision was made, have often said that affirmative action is an issue that they hope will drive voters to the ballot box, will drive them to get out next November, because they feel that, certainly there's only so much the president can do. This is an issue that voters have to be a deciding factor on.
It's really interesting, Mary. Thank you. Mary brings up the voters and whether or not this will now drive people to the polls. And the polling is interesting. Aside from what they'll decide on Election Day, the polling on this issue has somewhat nuanced. Most Americans say they strongly support promotion of racial diversity on college campuses, universities across the country, but strong majorities also oppose the use of race as a factor in admissions decisions. John Carl, somewhat complicated there. Strongly support promotion of racial diversity, but not using it as the deciding factor.
And the numbers on this show that public opinion is almost exactly the same on both of those points, which to some degree are at odds. I mean, you have in the latest polling on this, 63% of Americans saying that they favor a ban on using race as a factor in admissions to colleges, but almost exactly the same number saying that they support the idea of programs that increase racial diversity on college campuses. So the question now to all these colleges, which must, in very short order, rework their admissions criteria, is how they do that if they no longer have the tool of race-based affirmative action. How do you ensure that a college campus reflects the country at large? How do you ensure that a college campus continues to have racial diversity on campus?
And it would seem they're arguing, John, that the biography, the narrative put forward by an individual student would be how you would achieve that. I know there's going to be debate on whether or not that's the best way to do this, but that's the case they're making in this decision.
But I mean, David, we've all been through the college application process, some of us longer ago than others, but you can imagine the pressure that might put on students who feel that they must make their essay effectively about how their race has affected their life. Some obviously would like to do that. Some may want to write about something else. But this says if race is to be a factor in the admissions, you must make it part of your story. Your story is most effectively told on those college applications through that very critical essay.
John Carl, valid point. John, thank you so much. I want to bring in Professor Mitchell Krusto, professor of law at Loyola, who himself, he has said that affirmative action made a big difference in the trajectory of his career, his path. And I just wanted to get your reaction, Professor, to this decision.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a bleak day for equity, diversity, and inclusion, especially for racial minorities. Back in 1971, when I applied to Yale College, I knew that Yale was interested in having me as a qualified candidate apply as an African American. Today, the Supreme Court is sending a negative message to racial minorities who are applying to colleges that they're going to have another obstacle of the many obstacles that they face relative to college and university admissions.